Good evening. Calling to order the meeting of the Housing Needham Advisory Group for Thursday, October 5th, 2023. Right off the bat, we just want to say we're starting this meeting at 6 p.m. and we know and apologize that there was an error in News You Needham that said that it started at 7. So if you're watching this after the fact, recording on YouTube, our apologies. So I think we'll just go around maybe really quickly, and since this is only our second meeting, can we just do another very brief intro just so everyone knows who everyone is, particularly if people are watching. So I'm Heidi Krail, and this is Natasha Espada, my co-chair.
Kevin Key.
Jean McKnight, I serve on the planning board and on this group.
I'm Lee Newman, I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development.
Alex Klee, Town Planner.
Katie King, Deputy Town Manager.
Eric Halverson with RKG Associates.
Emily Ennis with Ennis Associates.
Ron Ruth, a member of the committee designated by the planning board.
Okay, and then we have a bunch of our committee members online with us today. So if you all could maybe just, we'll start with Michael.
Hi, I'm Michael Diener. I'm listed as citizen at large, member of the committee.
Great, and Liz?
Hi, I'm Liz or Elizabeth Caponia, and I was nominated by the select board as a renter, representing renters.
Great, Josh?
Josh Levy, member of the Finance Committee.
Oh,
You're able to hear me?
yes, yes.
Okay. Josh Levy, member of the Finance Committee.
Excellent, thank you. Bill?
Bill Lovett, by the planning board on the committee as a developer representative.
Great, and Karen?
Karen Sonneborg, Community Housing Specialist.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. It's good to be here again. We're very excited for this meeting. I just want to talk about the meeting goals tonight. We are with our fabulous duo consultants who will be sharing the result of running the two scenarios through our compliance model. These are the two scenarios that we discussed in our last meeting. One is to check out our existing zoning, and then also the suggestions made in the 2022 housing plan. So we're gonna see what resulted from those, and the goal of this meeting is to decide what this committee decides if we want to bring to our public forum, which is our not next meeting but the following meeting, to discuss as a starting point for public consultation. So it might be the ones that we see here, it might be some combination of that and something else. We need to come to some kind of consensus, and that's what we're up to tonight, which is why we're starting at 6 instead of at 7. So just before we move on, I want to just let you know that we're going to defer the minutes from our last meeting. Just a couple of items have come up that we need to maybe look at a little bit more closely. So we're just going to, we didn't have the time to share that with the whole committee. So we're going to do that, and then we'll take a look at them at our next meeting. So we're going to move on then, unless you have anything more.
No, I think we should just move on.
Okay, we're gonna let our consultants take it away.
Great. Thanks, hi everyone again. Eric Halverson with RKG Associates, and joined by Emily from Ennis Associates tonight. So we did a bunch of work since we last met. Went over that work with staff and the chairs to make sure that, most importantly, we actually got the district drawn right, because we had to draw the whole thing by hand in GIS. So I think we got it all right, both existing zoning and the housing proposal, and then checked the zoning that we wanted to run against that, the actual zoning bylaw language. So Lee helped me just go through all that, make sure we're running the right stuff. So we have everything done. Put it into a PowerPoint that we can share with you tonight, and just walk through the results. Feel free to interrupt if that's okay. I don't mind, whatever you both want to do. with any questions along the way. I do have the actual compliance models. If we ever want to go in and see what something looks like, if we want to say, what does it look like if we increase heights or decrease heights or change parking or whatever. So there is the option to do that as well. And Emily sort of designed, I think, a neat little exercise that she can talk about maybe once we go through the presentation. That might help us think about the different levers that we can push and pull in the model itself. Sort of the zoning levers that actually make a real difference when it comes to unit capacity and density. Sure, yeah. Yeah, we'll pass that around now, just so everyone has it when it comes time. So I'll share my screen for those of you
Jean?
online and in the room. Can everyone online see that okay? Great, thanks. Okay, so tonight I wanted to just sort of go over three things. One is the scenario overview. What did we run? What questions were we trying to answer? Probably what everybody wants to see is the actual results of the modeling and talk a little bit about that. Where does this leave us? And then what potential pathways do we have as a town toward compliance? And then I imagine at the end of the presentation, we'll want to talk about the results and yeah, what do we want to run with? Do we want to test anything else before our next meeting, I think on the 18th? And then certainly either tonight or certainly on the 18th, what are we going to bring forward to the November meeting? So just in terms of the scenarios, I just wanted to start really quickly with a recap. I know we went over this in detail last time, but just in terms of, again, these are the bare minimums that we would have to meet legally per the guidelines. So we have to have a minimum land area of the 50 acres. 90% of that, or 45 acres, has to be located within a half mile of the commuter rail stations. We need to have one district under the 50-acre scenario that's at least 25 acres, but that's really not the number. We'll talk about what that minimum number is, because it's 50% of whatever the entirety of the district is. So it's in this case, it's a much bigger number, but we're okay. Minimum district size of 5 acres. We're not gonna have a problem with that. The unit capacity of 1784 with 90% of that, 1606 located within the station area. And then again, the minimum density of 15 dwelling units an acre. So this is everything that we're sort of testing in the model and making sure that we're hitting or determining if we're not. So for the two scenarios that we ran for this evening, one, which I think was a great suggestion, was to run the existing zoning as is. So we try to answer the question, what would happen if we actually modeled the existing districts, as well as the zoning as it's written today for those districts. Recognizing that we may have to make some tweaks to the zoning, such as shifting, allowing multifamily, or certainly allowing it as of right. That would be a big change to the existing zoning that we would need. But other than that, sort of small changes here and there. And then the other, which we've always known we were going to run, which was the 2022 housing plan proposal, as was devised and presented in the housing plan. So like I said, we digitized all that in GIS, the differences and how they would differ from existing zoning, and then the slight modifications that were suggested to the zoning in each of those districts, which I'll talk about in a minute. So those are the two scenarios that we've modeled so far. So just for context, we'll talk first about the geography, then we'll talk about the zoning. So from a geographic standpoint, the map in the middle represents the existing zoning districts that were tested. So everything that essentially has been given a color on this map is kind of in that tested district, working from north to south. And you can see we have the concentric rings, or the radius, the half-mile radius rings around each of the three stations. You could just see visually, so much of the existing zoning districts fall within the half mile. So the entire gross acreage of the contiguous district is 307 acres. If you remember, we need 50, so no problem there.
Just one question.
Of course.
Just to remind, the lines that are cut across, those are wetlands, right?
It could be, that is excluded land. There's a couple of different categories
And
that
that's
fall.
taken into account in the 307 acres.
Take into account the 273 where you say the
Okay.
net acreage. Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm.
No, great question. So yeah, the net acreage is 307 gross minus what has to get taken out for excluded land. Which is, another way to think about that is land that the state has deemed undevelopable. And the 273 acres, that net acreage is what we have to use to calculate density, to calculate the 15 dwelling units. So you can see out of the 307 acres, 300 acres or about 98% fall within that transit area. We needed 90%, so we're good. In terms of the minimum district size, I had referenced the 25 acres versus the 50. The way that's calculated is you take your total gross acreage of 307, you multiply that by 50%. So we have to have at least one contiguous district that is 153.5 acres, if we do the math really quickly.
And excuse me, we do have that contiguity.
So I do want to point out just one thing that I pointed out to the internal staff group that we met with. I'm sorry, just need to get rid of the thing that's on my screen that's not on anybody else's. There we go. If you can see, apologize, if you can see my mouse up here on the top of the map, can you see the pointer there?
Yes.
Right here between A1 and
Hillside
the Avery
Avenue
Square business.
That's actually Hillside Avenue business.
This one?
Yes,
Yeah.
Avery Square business.
Oh, I'm
is
sorry,
right of
yeah,
Pink.
you're right, it's HBH, yep, you're right, it's Hillside Avenue. You'll see this little piece of rail right of way that spans here.
Mhm.
I have asked HLC to give me a determination as to whether they will consider that to be contiguous, because we're jumping a rail right of way. My gut tells me they're gonna say no, and that's okay, because if we have to split off this most northerly piece, it's more than 5 acres, which is the minimum size of a district anyway. So from a compliance standpoint, it really doesn't matter. It just matters like ultimately whatever we land on, we just have to measure one district or two, so.
I remember that we were struggling with, further, I guess, south, at Rosemary Street. You see Rosemary Pond, Rosemary Street, but the industrial district, that's bright red. And then you've got the business
Right
district
here.
right there.
Yeah.
That's where we struggled with contiguity.
Yep.
It's a little closer than the one up above.
It
but
is.
It's still, we were bringing it over to include the library as a way of doing it. We were told that you could do
Oh,
that.
yeah.
But, do you think that raises a question if we don't?
That one I'm
include it?
less concerned about because I think we're jumping a right of way, so I think that one's gonna be okay.
Yeah.
We'll certainly check all
If
these.
that's okay,
But you
that's
thought
great.
that
Yeah.
the library wasn't in the industrial district, is that correct? There was like a missing tooth there or something.
Oh,
No, but it's a reason.
yeah, it's that we didn't have land areas that actually ran along each other. You have to cross Rosemary
Right.
Street and cross the railroad right of way, both those things.
But was the library the same zoning? It was industrial?
No, right now, the library is residential.
Right, so right now, that's saying existing zoning scenario, that needs to be changed to the library.
Well, this.
Yeah, there are changes that we would have to make. to the-
Yeah, if they didn't accept that it was contiguous.
Yeah.
By just crossing Rosemary and the railroad
We
right
have
of
to
way,
add something.
then we'd have to think of another solution. But I think we're being told that most likely it will be accepted.
Yeah, I feel better about that one than I do about the one to the north. I think that one will be a challenge, but I'm waiting on HLC
Right.
to give
This
me
is
a
not industrial.
ruling on that.
Good.
So, but I do want to flag that for everybody. That might come up.
My plan is.
So just in terms of, in terms of all the acreages and meeting those, I think everything looks great. This is just a reminder of the zoning parameters that we ran for each of the districts that fall within the scenario that we ran. Just in case, and it just really more as reference for anybody who was wondering sort of what the inputs were into the model.
If it's time to ask other questions about the existing zoning that you're modeling, you do understand that zones such as the business zone that runs along Highland Avenue that's just south of Rosemary Street does not allow any housing whatsoever now.
Correct,
Right.
So when you talk about existing zoning, you mean with the changes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So will you have a plan that shows existing zoning and say, these are the minor changes that we have to make?
We are working on that.
Okay, the only reason I bring that up is because it seems like we have it done, but it's
Oh,
not.
no,
And so then
absolutely.
that gives flexibility for different scenarios of zoning that could create better opportunities.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So could I ask a clarifying question, similar to the previous two? For all the areas that are colored in, any of the districts, the apartment districts, the general residence, are those minor changes to make 18 units per acre allowable by right in each of these?
No, we haven't identified all the changes, but I think as was just pointed out, the big ones are going to be around whether housing is allowed and secondarily, whether housing is allowed as of right. There probably will be some other tweaks that we might identify. I just don't know what those are tonight.
So of the districts that were modeled, there are only two that don't currently allow multiple family housing, and that's in the business district and in the industrial district. But the other commercial districts, Avery Square, Chestnut Street Business, Hillside Avenue Business, all allow multiple family housing by special permit at 18 units per acre. So in those districts, the conversion is only from a special permit process to an as of right process. And then, of course, the apartment district allows it as of right at that density.
Okay, so the changes would be, other than the number of units, it would be something related to setback or density. Is that right?
And whether or not you need a special permit.
Whether or not you need a special permit or not, and then opening up the use in the business district and the industrial district at those density parameters.
Based on
Okay.
this model, we still have additional zoning analysis to do that looks at the entire zoning bylaws, just to make sure there's nothing else that might jump out. But in terms of this analysis, those would be the changes.
Yeah, and
I think the next page you're probably gonna show that has the table, it makes that clear which districts need.
yeah,
Looks like Michael has a question as well. Michael?
Yeah, I hope people can hear me. I have a rather unstable connection. But on the page that has the table, I think it was the next sheet, I think it was page 7. I just wanted to understand why the general residence is listed as 2 units per acre. I thought it was 2 units per quarter acre.
That's correct.
is it? Okay, we'll have to fix that.
It's a 10,000 square foot zone.
Good catch.
Yeah, thank you.
Good catch, Michael. Thank you. Okay.
Because I think it might affect some of the calculations down the line, because there were some numbers that came out kind of strange, that seemed strange.
It will 100% affect the outcome of that. Because,
got a live model.
yeah, we're talking about 8 units an acre, not 2 units. an acre.
Exactly.
Right.
That would make a
Yes,
difference.
that'll make a
Yeah.
big difference.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Josh, just want to clarify one thing. I don't know if I heard you correctly, but not every single zoning district has to be at 15 or 18 dwelling units an acre. Since we're measuring the entirety of the MBTA district, it's just that whole district. So the sort of sum of the parts has to be at 15 dwelling units an acre or more. So there is flexibility to have some, what I would call zoning districts or sub-districts that are higher density and some that are lower. That's okay. Just so that
Yeah.
everything essentially averages out to 15 or more dwelling units an acre.
Thanks for that reminder.
Yeah,
I thought it all had to be.
It gives you a certain amount of flexibility in deciding where you want what. So that's part of the conversation that we can have.
yeah.
What's current, the general residence right now? Is it up by a special permit or does it have no housing, no more housing allowed right now?
It's by right.
The general residence?
The general residence is basically
one by
4
right
units
also,
per acre
okay.
by right.
Okay. Okay.
So just moving on to the housing plan scenario before we get to the results. You'll see that the gross acreage is 341 acres under this scenario, which is up from the 307 acres that we had under the existing condition, under the existing zoning. That's because under the housing plan, we're adding some additional districts in, suggested in the plan. We have, once we subtract the excluded land, we have a net acreage of 307 acres. And in this case, we have about almost 340 of 340 acres in the area. Yeah, I just circled on the map a couple of the areas that were just different. So we have some additions of apartment 1 zoning that I think used to be in the SRB zone. Some additional shifts for general residents and a little bit, and then a little bit more of the Chestnut Street district to the south. Just to kind of highlight where some things changed and where some additions were made.
Excuse me, I'd
Yes.
like to understand this better. What you modeled was the map for existing zoning scenario. But what was in the housing plan included some additional zoning changes. But that was not what we were modeling.
Additional land.
We did
Right.
model
We
that.
modeled that.
Yeah, we modeled 2 scenarios, both of those maps have been modeled.
Oh, this one is the housing plan and it does show
Exactly. The
proposed
changes.
proposed rezoning of areas that are now single residence B
Exactly.
and general residence. But I think you're gonna tell us that we might not need to do that. We'll see.
I'm not gonna tell you anything.
Don't give away the end.
You wanna go to Josh?
Yeah, Josh.
Oh, thank you, Heidi. Maybe this is a question for members of the previous housing plan working group. What was the thought for not considering areas in the area around Hersey for rezoning?
Did, actually, it's just not on this map. There was less area to work with. But we did look at Hersey in the original housing plan work through.
Oh, but it didn't recommend areas around Hersey.
Right, as I recall, and Dean, please correct me if I'm wrong, the parking lot at the station is not accessible to us because that had been there was a land swap, is that right, Katie?
Yes.
Yeah, so the parking lot does not belong to us. And there is that very small commercial zone. But because tell me if this is what you remember as well, but because we felt that we had achieved the compliance with the spine, we decided not to impinge on the single family residence neighborhoods that were surrounding those 2 bits.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good summary. And the commercial area is very small. The whole idea is walkability. And although you certainly could draw a half mile around Hersey and say, this is an area where people can walk to the train. It's not like the other areas where there are commercial areas you can walk to. So it has a very different quality of walkability. And so we decided to work with that and try to expand that commercial area or change as Heidi said, we decided not to do that.
Thank you. I don't want to rehash old discussions that you may have had, but as I look at this map, if there are concerns that we hear at the community meeting about congestion or the amount of new units within these 3 stations, perhaps one way to lessen that would be maybe to have less of the rezoned area within these 3 districts, 3 areas shown around these stations, and move some of it to that Hersey area. But I know that may pose other problems. I was just wanted to suggest that as an option for discussion at some point.
There's gonna be time to tailor these plans. Let's focus on getting through the presentation first, and then, because I think this is gonna be the balance of the meeting tonight, is discussing how we need to change them. But let's just see what they came up with first.
So just really quickly, the next slide highlights the zoning changes just from the dimensional standpoint. In each of the districts where it would be potentially different from existing zoning. So you can see in Chestnut Street and Hillside, we gain a little bit of height. The FAR changes a little bit. The setbacks, which they don't actually come into account in the modeling, but I did just want to pull out that the setbacks would be different.
Eric, can
Yeah.
you just collapse the box so we can see the headers there? That's me.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Thanks.
And then under the housing plan scenario, other than in apartment one, the maximum dwelling units per acre are removed. Josh, did you still have a question, or is your hand still up?
No, I'm good. No, thank you.
Okay.
Just to clarify, for the center business district, that's excluded,
We did not model that
right?
Right.
because of the discussion around mixed use.
In both versions?
Yes,
In both
we did
versions.
not
Okay,
model that
I
at
just
all.
want to be clear.
So we can discuss that when it's the time if we want to. Okay, so probably now what you really want to see, the modeling results. So we'll start with existing zoning. So in the table that's on the screen, and I think what you will have in front of you, you will see the results for each of the zoning districts that we modeled. And then on the far right-hand side in the bolded column, you will see the totals. The total is, at the end of the day, really what matters, but I like to show you everything so that you can see what's potentially driving unit capacity or size or density, so that if we need to play with anything going forward, we can. So what you'll see is, as I mentioned, we meet the gross acreage, we meet the unit capacity, or, almost at 2,050 units, so we exceed the unit capacity. But you'll notice at least what we've modeled now, and we can change this because we need to. The unit capacity in general residence is really bringing down the density. Once we change that from 2 to 8, it will certainly go up. We can do that on the fly tonight while you're discussing. Maybe I can fix that and I can show you what it is.
Quick question.
Yeah.
What does DDD mean?
So the DDD, that's the net acreage number that I showed before. It's called the density denominator. So that's your gross acreage minus excluded land.
Oh, it's the gross acreage minus excluded
Yep.
land.
And if you're
DDD stands for literally.
density denominator, I don't know what's the other D? The other D is, but it's the density denominator.
Okay.
I'm thinking
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah, I
Okay,
don't remember what the
understood
third D
now.
is.
Gross less excluded.
Yeah. And so that number, the DDD acreage, that's what we use to divide by the two. Well, in the case of the total, we divide 2,049 units by 273.27 acres, and we get 7.5 dwelling units an acre. So that's why the DDD acreage number is so important, because that's what drives the density calculation. We did test, and again, we'll have to fix this test, but I did test just dropping general residence from the model. And at 45, in this case, it would only lose 45 units, but you would also lose 146 acres. So it ends up bringing the density to almost 16 dwelling units an acre if we dropped general residence. So just as like a straw man. Okay, ready to move on? So the housing plan scenario, as I mentioned, we rezoned some of the SRB and general residence to apartment 1, rezoned a small portion of SRB to general residence per the housing plan scenario. And then obviously this would need to allow multifamily housing as of right in all the zoning sub-districts, plus a couple of those minor dimensional tweaks that we showed before. So that's kind of the primary difference between existing zoning scenario and housing plan scenario. If we just look at the totals for a second, in the far right column, we see 341 total acres. about 307 acres for our density denominator, 5,183 total units for capacity, and a density of 16.9 units per acre.
District density denominator. That's your
Oh,
third D.
thank you. District
welcome.
density denominator.
Excuse me, on apartment one, why is the dwelling units per acre so low? At 11.3, whereas, it's already zoned for apartments. Why is there a big difference between the two scenarios?
I believe it's because the acreage went from about 28 acres to 81 acres. So we have more land, and then there may just be some restrictions on the land that we added, which
You
drives the
expanded all
density.
those other districts, you added those new districts
Yeah.
with the conversions.
Yeah, so we go from 28.18 acres with a unit capacity of 359 to, almost 3.5 times as much acreage, and not that many more units.
And remembering too that it's calculated on a parcel by parcel basis. So it may be zoned for 18 units per acre, but when you do the parcel by parcel calculation, because of which parcel has what on it, that may drop. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, guys online, I see your hands. Let's just let them get through this slide and we'll stay on the slide and then you can ask the questions. It's a little choppy otherwise. So
Yeah.
just hang on 1 second, we'll get to you. Eric, why don't you keep going?
Keep going through the presentation or just this slide?
Just to finish this slide.
I think that was it.
Oh.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Sorry.
Michael, can you hear us?
I can't, I heard that. I just wanted to understand, since I thought that the maximum we were talking about was 18 per acre, why are the general residence and Avery Square business and business, how is it that they're above that amount? Where are those numbers coming from?
There, under what we modeled for the housing plan scenario, we removed, other than in apartment one, we removed the dwelling unit per acre restrictions.
Wait, so there's
I'm
no,
sorry,
there's
can you
no.
repeat
Okay, let me show you, let me just show you the slide real quick. Here's existing zoning. If you look at the bottom row, you will see maximum dwelling units per acre of 18 in apartment one, 18 for Avery Square, 18 Chestnut, 18 for Hillside. Obviously, general residence needs to be corrected. In the model is never when we put those parameters in, the model says you cannot have more than 18 dwelling units per acre on any parcel, or technically in this district that you're modeling. Let's fast forward now to the housing plan scenario where I've highlighted in the pink color on the bottom. We've now removed those restrictions. So the model is just looking at dimensional requirements and restrictions. It is no longer limiting by the 18 dwelling units or whatever number we want to put in there.
Okay, so but the lot coverage and the FAR, those all exist.
Yes.
It's just, that's what's gonna limit it versus the discrete number of. units.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay.
And when we start talking about the different levers that you can pull, I think this will become a little bit clearer, but just removed that particular lever, the 18 units per acre. That one's just zeroed out for the moment.
Yeah.
And it's allowed to float to whatever the actual results are.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Does that answer your question, Michael? Since you can't hear me and you're back on mute, I'm gonna assume yes. And we're gonna go to Josh, who I think had another question.
My hand is not up. Not sure how to fix that.
Okay.
My hand is. So a question, we've done the dimensional analysis in this. There are some locations, I'm not sure if there are very many, but there are a few that have a greater density as a result of either grandfathering or special permits. And so in some cases, this is down zoning locations in town. And have you looked at that, or Lee, have you?
Well,
talked about
I think
that?
when you mean when they ran the existing zoning
Yes.
parameters,
Yeah.
we chose not to run the overlay. We chose to run the underlying district to see
Okay,
what that would get us. With the idea that if it got rezoned at that lower density, you'd have the incentive to exercise a special permit to get higher density and perhaps mixed use.
Okay.
And that's via the overlay.
Yeah, so that was the thought process along Chestnut Street. I think the question was, if you just allowed for the 2.5 stories, 0.7 FAR, as opposed to the overlay density, what would that generate in terms of a number? Would that make you compliant? If you converted that housing to as of right?
Right.
And then you basically have the incentive really to go off and do a higher density by special permit, and get more of a mixed use approach as opposed to a singular housing development.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I'd like to think about, because I mean, I think the message, some of those are large parcels, and the message of this effort is no change. You're right where you were before we started, and maybe that's okay.
So the special permit is still there.
No, that's what I'm saying, is
Right.
that it's no change. It's-
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's really, that's a policy choice, really.
Right, exactly. Okay, that's helpful, thanks.
I'm really struggling with this. Maybe an example, Jeff, would help me, because I'm focusing on the existing zoning scenario for apartment 1. And apartment 1, there are 4, apartment 1 districts. There are 4 developments in that district. And 2 of them are on Highland Avenue and 2 of them are on Rosemary Street. And first of all, I'm surprised they only sum up to 28.18 acres, but if they do, they do. But if you take that 28.18 acres and you multiply it by 18, you have a unit capacity of 465.
Yeah, but so the model, this is a question we get all the time. It's not straight math in the model.
So this calculator isn't giving me any.
No, it's, well, you're half right, yeah. So you have to think about it. It's not straight math, because we're not doing the math for the whole district. We're doing the math on a parcel by parcel basis, and parcels vary by size. So some parcels might be smaller and therefore can't accommodate 18 dwelling units an acre. Some parcels might be larger and can accommodate 50. Well, actually, they can't. They could accommodate 18 if we're capping it in the model. They could do 18. Some parcels will be potentially restricted by undevelopable land. So you'll have to take out that land.
But you already did that with the GGD acreage. I mean, isn't that 25.84? You already took out.
That's
do.
on the district basis, but each individual parcel also has that taken out. So you're just seeing the district
Yeah.
summary here. Behind it is the model that's showing it parcel by parcel by parcel. When we actually get to running the model, we can maybe just give them a quick glimpse of what
We could,
the innards look like.
yeah.
Maybe.
So-
Right.
There's also assumptions in the model too that restrict the building footprint.
Mhm,
So there's restricted land
mhm.
or excluded land. There's open space percentage that we have to take into account. And there's also surface parking that we have to take into account. So all those things, depending on the size of the parcel, then restrict that building footprint down and down until you have whatever that building footprint is, multiply it by the height to get your volume,
Mhm.
divide that by 1,000 square feet per unit, and that's how you get your unit count essentially.
So if you just multiply the zoning density times the number of acres, you did take out the excluded land here on the district basis, but obviously it's parcel by parcel, but you're not including the calculation for parking in there. You're not including the calculation for, there's a standard open space percentage that takes into account setbacks. And so the calculator that you're using isn't taking into account the open space. It's not taking into account the parking. So your calculator is going to overestimate the actual capacity or the estimated capacity that could be reached by the model.
This is why we are consultants. We've been talking about now compliance model for every zoning proposal ever.
So, just to give an example of one of the factors, the parking requirement is 1.5 spaces per unit. If we change that, if we say, well, we're gonna go for zoning that is only 1 space per unit.
It will give you
then
more
we can
building
increase it.
footprint.
Got it.
And which gives you more building volume, yes.
I
But then you have to think about, is 1 space per unit the appropriate parking measure for this area? So,
Could you do it by area?
By sub-district, yeah.
Absolutely.
The same
Yeah.
way.
By the zoning district essentially?
Yeah.
Right, because there was a study done and the central district exceeds the parking, I mean, or has allowable parking, but other areas may not.
Mhm.
So then if you tailor it to that, so it could be beneficial to some areas.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, glad we hired you.
So this is it, just in summary, just on the table today, of course, there are plenty more choices that are out there, but just what we've talked about today. If you use the existing zoning, you may want to think about dropping districts to lower the capacity, or you can play with acreage to increase density, because we do need to get that 7.5 dwelling units an acre up. As I mentioned, I'll rerun it using the higher metric and see what we get. You could keep the district as is, and you can play with the density through maybe more intensive zoning. If we need to get that number of units up, maybe it's more height, maybe it's less parking, there's a lot of different levers that we can pull. Or maybe it's a combination of the two. Using the housing plan, you could potentially keep the proposal as it is. It appears to meet compliance. You could also potentially drop the number of districts that we're measuring to lower the unit count, as well as the overall size of the district, since we are over by quite a bit. Or you could even think about modifying zoning to decrease the capacity and lower the density, since we are over on both of those. So I'm not suggesting you do any of those things. There's just different choices.
Mhm.
And there's also choices we haven't even thought about that you may have in your heads. So.
In some ways, it's a little tricky for you all. I think it would have been a lot easier if we'd come into you and said, this doesn't work, and you just have to make these 5 changes and you'd be all set. But you are in kind of the enviable, but a little bit more difficult position of being able to tailor this to really meet the needs of your community. And so what we're hoping to do is give you those tools so you can have that discussion and let us know what you want us to test out in order to give you more information about what the implications are.
Well, as we've come to expect now, that was a fabulous presentation, very clear and very helpful. So tell us what you can show us as far as, Emily, you said you had a way to show us kind of the behind the scenes business.
Yes, let me explain what the handout is and how it might inform your discussion. And then we can also show sort of what the model looks like as part of that. So you have both maps. The map of the existing zoning scenario and the map of the housing plan scenario. So you can look at the geography and see if there's any choices you'd like to make about that. We cannot model the geography live. That is actually beyond our capabilities. But we can model the other choices, the dimensional standards. And so each of these pages is the series of levers that we used. We've got one for each district. Just as a reminder, if we go around playing with everything, the numbers at the top, the lighter colors are the existing zoning results for each of those districts. The blue colors are the housing plan results in both the unit capacity and the density. And then you have the 6 main levers that we use in the model. So lot size, height, floor area ratio, lot coverage, parking, and dwelling units per acre. Now, not all of your districts used all of these. If they use them, you'll see a blue arrow for the existing zoning next to the amount that we've used. So in the case of apartment 1, it was a lot size of 20,000 square feet. If the housing plan changed it, we will then see just a little line, let me find one, a brighter blue arrow. Saying this is the housing plan. So you can see, oh, there was a difference. This is Hillside Avenue. The height went up on Hillside Avenue under the housing plan, and the floor area ratio went down. If you see just a line with nothing else, so in this one, the line's down at the bottom, that means it wasn't used. Same thing for the existing zoning. Apartment 1 doesn't have lot coverage. So it's just a lever, but with no arrow. So that signals that we didn't actually use that as a limiting factor. So one of the things that we can do tonight. Oh,
Could
yes,
I
yes.
just interrupt to just say, for anyone who might be watching, that this handout is in our packet.
Yes.
And so you can follow along if you go to our packet, which is on the website. And you know, if you're watching at a later time, feel free to email me at planning@needhamma.gov and I'll send you a link to the packet.
No, I'm glad you did that.
It's
yeah.
helpful, I think, for people to know that this is available to them. Sorry.
No, perfect timing for the interruption. So, and well taken for the people at home. So we can go through, and if you want to vary any of those, we have the model available. We can show you what it looks like and what the results are. As part of the conversation you're going to have about what you want to do. We wanted to make that tool available to you live.
So to start then, can I ask that we make the change to the general residence number that,
So it's gonna go from 2 to 8, is that correct? Since it's 2 units per quarter acre?
Correct.
It'll go 2 to 8?
Right.
Okay, so I just did that.
that'll represent our actual existing zoning.
Exactly.
Right. Can you show us what the numbers do? Because I think that'll
Yep.
make it, yeah. Changes possibilities in the represents.
Okay, so I had to create a separate document to model all of the districts, because we have 7 districts. The MBTA compliance model can only model 5 at a time. So I had to create a separate sort of calculation so that we could do all 7 at the same time. I changed, so this top scenario here that I'll highlight, this is existing zoning. This matches what was in your packet with the exception of me changing now to 8 units an acre. We went from 45 units in general residential to 444. We went from about 2,050 units to 2,448. But you'll see the density went from like 0.3 now to 3. And our total overall density went up to 9. So we're still, even by making that adjustment to existing zoning, we're still substantially short on the dwelling units per acre metric.
Thank you for doing that. That's really helpful.
If you just wanted to see now, you know, again, what it does, if we just get rid of general residential, we still have 2,000 units and 15.8 dwelling units an acre. We have 129 given gross acres, 126. Still that same amount is going to be within transit, so we should still continue to meet the requirements.
So if you drop general residence, you still have technical compliance.
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
That includes the contiguity requirement?
I would have to double check that.
That's
the geography
what I
that
was
we
worried
can't-
about.
Yeah.
That's what I was worried about. And I didn't,
Anyway.
in working on the housing plan, we never realized that you could have a zone that, like general residence in its current form, that only has 8 units per acre, and that could count in your overall plan for MBTA communities. We thought, oh no, you can't count that. You have to rezone it.
No, you can count that as long as the density and the other acreage allows you to average out to 15 units per acre. So as Eric noted earlier.
You definitely would run into contiguity issues on the north side of the district.
Yeah.
Because you would lose contiguity mostly with the existing the 2 industrial portion parcels to the north.
Yeah, I think you're okay on the south.
Yes,
But
because
it's
they're on
the
the
north
fringe,
of the
they're sort of on the
district.
edges of the district, so
Yeah.
I think, yeah, you're right, I'm like to the south and in the center there, you'd be okay, but it's really, yeah, on the north side, so we would have to redraw. You know, if again, you wanted to test something like that, we just have to redraw it and see what that looks like.
The other thing, Jean, is that these districts, I mean, you had a model where the district basically covered the entire lot. They weren't allowing for split lot situations. So in the case of the business district, for example, Long Island Avenue, it doesn't go all the way up to the cross street, it doesn't go all the way up to Rosemary. It was modeled going all the way up to Rosemary.
Oh,
Because they couldn't split the lot. And the same thing is happening really with the industrial district. It's not coming, currently there's a buffer there, so there had to be some kind of strategy about how that was handled in terms of zoning to provide for that connection if you, without bringing the industrial district, for example, all the way down to Rosemary.
There is something else you could do, which is so far to date, you've been talking about rezoning the entire area. But for the sake of the contiguity in the northern portion here, you could, if you wanted to, rezone a portion exactly of that residential area in order to create the contiguity. And then it would be something like general residential dash MBTA. Now, from a policy perspective, whether or not that's a good idea is part of the discussion. But from a drawing it out, you know, it's possible to do that.
But if you look at the plan, it could be very isolated lots, which I don't know those particular lots at the moment, but you're talking just eyeballing this 5-6 lots, you achieve your continuity.
On this part here, you mean?
Up there and over to the left on the other side.
Yeah, it would just, yes,
It's a
exactly.
couple, 5 lots, you might be able to re-achieve contiguity. I don't know whose lots those are, and I'm not advocating for it.
Right.
Yeah, from a technical standpoint, yes. You can do that,
Yes.
We have a question online, Michael.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that in the general,
He's present. All right, we'll come back to you, Michael. Jean, did you have a question?
Yes, I think it's all in the way this is presented to the public in the community meeting and eventually to town meeting. Because of what we're talking about is that
units per quarter acre, basically, that comes out to 8.
Keep going, Jean. Keep going.
is we're not talking about rezoning this general residence area. This is such good news, folks. We learned that we can use the area for contiguity without making any change whatsoever in the zoning of our general residence. And isn't that wonderful? Am I expressing that?
Depends on what your perspective is. If you want to encourage housing, then maybe not.
I want to just, yes, say something about that. I think that we need to understand that we have some decisions to make generally about whether we're in this for compliance or we're in this for housing production. There's a difference in land use, and we need to come to some kind of consensus as a committee about what our approach is going to be. So it is possible that we could choose not to rezone any general residence, but it is also possible that we could. So I just want to say that, like, these are all choices that we need to make. Hitting our numbers is one thing, but deciding what is best for Needham is another. And we just have to balance those two things.
And if it's helpful to, as we dive into the discussion, you know, I think our hope is that we go to that first community meeting with two scenarios, no more than 3. And so giving residents a choice and visual, like those 2 scenarios, so that they also are asking those same questions, I think that'll help us get feedback where we need it. You know, if we have one version that makes a lot of changes to general residents and there's a lot of feedback on that, that's helpful for this group. But we don't need to make that trade-off choice necessarily here. We need to decide what are we going to put before the public. So I guess I would suggest, you know, there's so much to think about, but I don't know if anyone has really big, like, complete deal breakers. I don't even want to create feedback on this versus it would be great to hear, you know, how the community feels about why.
I think I agree, but I think we also need a methodology for doing this, because you could go kind of haywire in every direction. And I think one of the things that I think we have to make it so that there's a reason why those 3 are chosen, right? But one question that I have for you, I think it's going to be really hard to rezone the entire general district, let's say on the upper left by, where is it called, by, I can't read it here.
Honeywell Street.
Yeah, by Honeywell. Partially, because then there's a matter of inequity there. So I guess my question is, first of all, the changing the 2 per acre versus the 8 per acre, is that a choice for the community as well?
No, that is the zone.
That's already the zone.
Yeah, that was my
Okay,
mistake.
so I just
So
want to
that's the
confirm
zone.
that it wasn't still, okay, so So that's beneficial anyway. My question is, if that whole block of general residential, and I'm not saying that's what we should do. If that is omitted and that industrial district, because there's no contiguity there, is omitted with other changes, what does that do for these numbers? Because the general residential,
The answer to
if
that.
general residential is the one that's bringing it down, right? And so that's the one that has an island of industrial, and that you don't wanna take 5 people and say, your lots are the one, pack your
I
egg.
think you do some homework on, it, is my own thought, rather than abstractly decide.
Okay.
We just don't, we don't even know what we're talking about, so what these lots are.
Thank you. How about a third scenario, in which we say criteria is, to use Gene McKnight's term, aligning streets and see how much we can pack in on Highland. And see like if that works, because that's one of the goals, is sort of to make the downtown.
How does that differ from what?
I
It's
don't-
all along.
Right, well, I don't know, I don't quite understand exactly what we're looking at number wise, but can we push more into anything on Highland and Chestnut?
Yeah.
So,
By
yeah.
more, you mean more.
We'd have to go
Well,
higher.
yeah,
We'd have to go higher.
Well,
We
I
have
mean,
to
that
go
might
higher.
be a policy question, because do we want to create a lively system there?
Mhm.
Or until we get more housing, we meet the standard, but if we want to go above it a bit, why don't we make it work so we have a lively system?
Okay, I'm gonna take a question from Zoom. Bill, you haven't gotten a chance? Let's hear from you.
Thank you. The equity question just came up in my mind, because as I was looking at the housing plan, and this is a question. We've got 72 of the acres in the Heights, and then 25 in the central business and Chestnut. And so I was just wondering and again, I apologize, I have read through most of the reports, so I don't know the exact rationale. But just thinking about equity, was that an intentional decision to put more of the rezone in the Heights?
Was not an intentional decision. It was based on the general residence designation. I think when we did this originally, which was some time ago, so I apologize if I don't precisely remember, we were saying that this is already a place where we can have multifamily.
If you're speaking of the what's shown in gray as apartment A1 in the Heights, those areas are presently zoned apartment A1, and were zoned that way in the 80s.
But are you talking about?
I was talking, there was a diagram with the circles of the half-mile radius that I looked with, and it called out the acreage in each one of those zones. I guess it's more of a planning comment. If, in looking at the housing plan and wanting to keep, minimize traffic, cars, it would seem like there might be more opportunity to make a denser or maybe perhaps more density, in closer to the downtown than in the Heights. And again, this may come back, I think this probably comes back to multiple options. Maybe you have a smaller district with more density, try to drive business and foot traffic and development more towards the downtown area in Chestnut Street. That could be one option compared to, or in contrast for the community, with a more, spread out plan, which is, I think, kind of what we're looking at now. I think from a economies and an efficiency standpoint, and along the lines of execution and housing creation, that might be something to consider.
Right, well, I don't disagree. I will say that I think that the housing plan scenario does add more in this, center bubble. Although it's true that there's still, the bulk is still in the at the top station.
It might be the same, it's just that it's in pockets.
Right. I said that originally. Oscar, who was on the housing plan working group, is just saying that none of this was rezoned. Yeah.
We didn't target any of the GR.
The GR is not rezoned.
It's just shown on
It's
the
just
map.
shown on the map and it's included in the district, but it's not been rezoned in the
It's not-
plan.
okay.
So it is, what it is now is what it would be in the housing plan zoning plan. So you can see more of it, it's highlighted, because we're counting it, but it's not changed.
Right, I guess what I'm saying, sorry, I'm not saying necessarily that it should be, I'm not articulating this clear enough. I'm just wondering if this may be one of the scenarios here could be an opportunity if the group thought it made sense to put some of the density in, to reallocate some of the density, regardless of where it's zoned now or not, I guess is my point.
Yeah, no, point taken and a good one. Thank you.
Well, I think building on that point, we probably should discuss the notion of the exclusion in the housing plan of the downtown. And where things stand now with regard to mixed use and whether that the densification that Bill's talking about is appropriate to be considered in the downtown.
Okay. I see two more hands on lines. So I'm just gonna get those questions and then we need to, I think, make a plan about how we're gonna approach this. Josh?
I'll let someone else go first.
Okay, Michael? We didn't hear your question before, Michael, because you're.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me.
Michael, you may want to try turning your video off. Please.
Or write your question, do you have a chat or? No.
I agree, if he turns off this video, you might have more.
All right, well,
Maybe
Josh,
goes
do
first.
you have a question or?
No, I agree with what Katie King said, that I think it would be good to hear from the community about, you know, if one scenario is a so-called minimal scenario, like that meets compliance, we have a scenario that looks at what the housing plan is doing, that can help us make that decision that you were saying, Heidi, about, you know, whether we're looking for compliance or we're looking for, you know, more housing, you know, above just the compliance numbers. I wonder if there's a scenario that we can consider, or at least present, that helps us narrow down the geography. So the questions about, you know, where the housing is, more in the center or, you know, more on Chestnut Street. Is there a contrasting scenario that we can present so that it would elicit feedback from the community?
I think that's a really good point. I also think that we just had a project that just came into the planning board on Great Plain Avenue. The one next to where the
Hillside Garden.
Sorry, where Hillside Garden is. And I have to say that we have to make a good case for more density downtown because there was pushback on height. And so I think we understand that the parking is available, that there's parking available in the area, but the height, which was not, I didn't think it was that high, but other members felt it was too high. And so I think we need to understand what kind of density that means and have examples from maybe other towns that have more density. Because if part of the buildings are one story because other buildings, you know, were taken down. And so we have one big tall building and all, I mean, we have to think kind of about the streetscape and the urban planning of that whole area to understand what it is, because if we're not, you know, I just want to bring that up because that just came up recently.
Yeah, and I think, as I understand it, one of the things that Emily and Eric are gonna help us with is envisioning what this density looks like or could look like, what are all the various scenarios, so that people can understand, well, 18 units per acre, what does that actually mean? I mean, it could mean one apartment building, but it could also mean several townhouses lots of green space, and so I think that's an important perspective too. When
Right.
you're looking at one parcel versus
An entire
all of
district.
the district, one building becomes, in contrast with the one story existing, looks really, really big.
It does.
But when you look at sort of and envision a future streetscape that has more consistent housing, then maybe it doesn't appear that way.
I'd like to respond or follow up with what Ron Ruth said about the central business. You see in the scenarios for modeling of what's called existing zoning, although I think that phrase is a bit misleading. And it's page 11. We do have Avery Square business and Chestnut Street business in the chart, which presently do not allow standalone multifamily housing. And central business also does not allow standalone multifamily housing. When we worked on the housing plan and thought of MBTA, we thought we had a rule that you can't have mixed use. Now you can have mixed use. So are we, with regard to Avery Square business and Chestnut Street business, does this chart on page 11 assume that we are going to allow standalone multifamily housing in those zones?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what you ran?
Yeah.
Okay, so, we had said before that, no, we didn't want to have standalone multifamily housing in the central business district. We only wanted to have mixed use. Thus, that was never recommended in the housing plan. But I agree with you that now we can.
Right.
And it's called counting it, but not
It's a
putting
little
it in the
funky.
base model or something. I don't understand that really.
No, I was just gonna ask if Eric and Emily could explain what it is, because I do still think it would, well, could you just explain what the new rule is?
Well, I guess there's two things that I would bring up. One is prior to them issuing the last guidance on the mandatory mixed use districts, you can have mixed use. You just couldn't mandate it. So as long as you allowed multifamily housing
I
as a
realize
right,
that.
Yeah.
you could
You
still
just
have
have
mixed
to
use.
allow
Well, I just wanted to make that clear, like,
Sure.
it's not that you couldn't have it before, you could, you
Yeah,
just couldn't mandate
we
it.
understood that.
Okay.
Yeah.
There are a lot of communities that didn't, which is why. we're
Yeah,
making
a
sure
lot of
it's there.
communities didn't
Yeah.
understand that. Okay, so the new rule, the way we understand it and interpret it is you can have a mandatory mixed use district. It cannot be the same thing as your 3A district. They have to be completely separate. So right now, central business is in the middle of your MBTA 3A district. We can't do that and count and keep the district as mandatory mixed use for modeling purposes. We can't do that. What we can do is we can separate the central business district or whatever, center business district, sorry, from your 3A compliant district. You'd have to separate it and model it completely separately, which the model doesn't exist yet, at least as far as I know. We have to model it separately. You run the exact same compliance model, give or take, minus probably a story of height. They're gonna ask you to, basically what they're gonna tell you is, there's gonna be a base floor of commercial, that's not gonna be housing. So take the top, if it's 3 stories, take 2 stories instead of 3 in your model. That's what they're gonna, I think that's what they're gonna end up
That's my
settling,
understanding as well, yeah.
right? Does that make sense?
No, did you say that again?
Okay, so what we're talking about tonight is the MBTA district. It's called the 3A, MBTA, chapter 40, section 3A compliant district. What we're talking about tonight is everything being modeled except, right, we didn't talk about central business.
Right.
So we need to make a decision about what we're gonna do there because it's gonna impact contiguity in the end. Right.
Oh, it would impact contiguity?
It would over here because there's no connection.
Yeah, you're gonna have an issue. I think.
And you're gonna have an issue here, there's no connection, so you're gonna have a donut
Take
hole.
it out, as you say. won't we have enough contiguity in the north side anyway?
We would have to remodel.
Yeah, we'd have to model separate
Yeah.
3A districts, yeah, which is totally fine.
Significant amount of general residential there, which would bring it to now, right?
Yes,
Now you know, by the way, why we're not modeling geography live tonight.
yeah, it would be too crazy,
It
but,
would be extremely crazy.
so let's just talk about this like hypothetically for a second.
Yeah.
Let's pretend for a minute that you want to include the center business district in your 3A district,
Mhm.
right? Want to model this whole thing under the existing guidelines. You'd have to go in, you'd have to remove mandatory mixed use. You just have to say mixed use is allowed. If you wanted this whole thing to count for your MBTA district,
Mandatory, it's not mandatory mixed
it's
use.
just allowed,
It's an allowed.
right? So you're not, right, but currently you're saying
Standalone commercial, of course.
standalone commercial, standalone multifamily, or mixed use.
You'd have to allow standalone multifamily.
Yes.
Why wouldn't we want that, I guess?
Because we want a vibrant streetscape and we feel like that.
No, I understand that, but I'm saying,
That's the reason.
no, I understand, yeah, I'm just.
You may feel that.
No, it's just, most of the downtown is built up anyway. And the contiguous long buildings, I think we need to look at it individually.
So here is a scenario that some towns fear or are concerned about is that they have or commercial that they would like to keep because it's vibrant and active.
And they're gonna say it.
Their concern is that the
Yeah, okay.
economics of multifamily, at least in the past, I'm not so sure about now, but at least in the past,
Right.
might privilege tearing down those two-story commercial, putting up multifamily only, and you've lost that ground floor use. You do have other communities that are concerned that if they mandate mixed use, they will end up with empty ground floor because there's not sufficient demand to fill them. That's another problem, but it's weighing those two things. But right now, in any 3A district, you must allow standalone multifamily as of right. You can allow commercial, you can allow mixed use as of right. You can't mandate the mixed use. The mixed use district that or the mixed use provision, I think is a better way of saying it, that they just allowed is exactly what Eric was saying, is you can have two districts. One is your MBTA district that allows a multifamily as of right. One is your mixed use mandatory district. In your mixed use mandatory district, say for the sake of the argument, you allow up to 3 stories. You can model it using 2 stories and then use the units that the capacity that generates as an offset up to 25% of your required capacity. So to make the math super easy, if your required capacity is 1,000 and you say, okay, I've got my multifamily district over here, I have my mixed use district over here at two stories of multifamily over 1 story of commercial, I'm able to generate 250 units. Then you could subtract that 250 units from your 1,000. Now you only have to give to 750 units
In
there.
the rest of your actual 3A district, you have to hit
Exactly.
750 instead of 1,000.
So it moves the ball down.
It's an offset.
It's an offset, yeah, it reduces your total amount.
And the mixed use is as of right.
The mixed use is as of right, I believe, yes, that's correct, I believe.
It has to be,
I'm
right?
pretty sure
Yeah,
it's as
yeah.
of right. So-
It's my view that that's something we should present. to
Yep.
the community, because that's the sort of discussion that we want to hear from the citizenry in terms of, do they want that or do they not want that? And it's this body's decision, but I think input on that would be helpful.
I'm gonna give you our caveats, that which I think Eric mentioned earlier is, HLC hasn't yet come out with the specific model or guidance. I agree with you,
Understood.
absolutely, if that's what the committee wants to do, yes, but just know that we might have to go back and rework the specific numbers once we get that full guidance.
Understood,
So,
we have a
yeah.
meeting in a month.
Yes.
And we have to get ready, and it seems to me that
Yeah.
that's an option that people can talk about and think
Mhm.
about. And frankly, my 2 cents, as you may be able to tell, is I think we ought to really seriously think about that. No.
Is it true that we can say, though, that we've found that we don't need it, the numbers work without adding the extra?
No, we have to make some changes.
Yeah.
Well, he's talking about to existing zoning scenario or to the housing plan.
Either.
Housing plan, I would say yes. Existing zoning, we do not meet the density requirement.
And if I could just say, in response to Phil's comment earlier about shifting the density. When we look at the housing plan scenario, I think that by adding these portions, we do shift the density. I understand that we're seeing this whole huge swath of yellow, but when we consider that this is existing zoning and that we wouldn't be changing it in this scenario, I think it's more accurate, even though we count it in the district, I really think it's more accurate to look at the map like this.
Yeah.
And when you do that, I just want to point out that I feel that the density is pretty well proportioned all along the area that we're discussing. So I hear what you're saying. I respectfully disagree, but I do feel like adding the pieces that the housing plan does really does help to fill in some of those spaces.
It helps show continuity, but. You're right. It can be confusing. I think it would change it.
Is there a reason why the Linden Street, Housing Authority land isn't doing this?
Yes.
Yes.
We're not gonna get into this.
The density, I'm just trying to think.
It's publicly owned,
Team housing.
right, so it's publicly owned land, it would be excluded land. It would actually.
But it's.
But they're developing.
But so that's right. It is.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
gonna be senior restricted, right?
That's the problem.
That's senior.
It
That's
is
the
the
reason.
problem. It's senior restricted and it will be 100% affordable.
Yeah, so income.
And I think
restricted,
that-
that's too much.
I think the zoning that we're talking about for it is going to have those factors that. But it's 100% affordable, it's seniors and disabled.
But it can't be included as part of the MPCF.
No,
Not with the senior restriction.
No, the senior restriction.
Yeah, but is the zoning going to restrict it for senior
Yes.
or is the development going to?
Well, we were gonna put it in the zoning, but maybe
Okay,
that
if you
doesn't.
put in the zoning, then you're 100% right. You can't count it.
But if you don't put it in the zoning, then how can you? I'm just thinking that's really, I mean, we're looking at really dense areas. I don't know
That's
if I-
big, that could offset a lot.
I tell you,
Yeah.
I was advocating for having the zoning that the housing authority needs at the high density that it needs. I think, I'm trying to remember the number of units per acre, it's
24.
20.
I'd have to go back. and
Let's say
look.
it's 24, something like that. Have that be an overlay zone. And that the overlay zone, it needs to be 100% affordable, it's for seniors and disabled.
Yeah.
But then we have an underlying zone that is compliant with 3A. Everything's allowed by right, et cetera. It will never happen. Because it's housing authority land and they're gonna build a higher density, which is all to the good, of course, if we needed it. But when I kind of heard the news, you know, like, oh, we think we're gonna be all set, we don't need it. So I thought, well, if
I'm
we
just
don't need
wondering
it,
if it's an
why
opportunity
complicate
that
it?
we should review
Yeah.
what the options are, because if that helps us with density. I mean, I think some of these neighborhoods with the say one, we have to blow this up and kind of really explain where that is, because I think that's really gonna get pushed back. Sure. I mean, my recommendation is because it's just kind of very generic right now, people don't know
Oh, yeah.
who's gonna be affected, and if you can tell who's gonna be affected and they understand that it's reasonable, then they might be more open to it.
And again, we're gonna emphasize that this is not doing anything to their house.
That's exactly
Right.
right.
Yeah.
This is the
Anyone can-
underlying zoning, so
Yes.
anybody who's in their house and has no plans to change.
Could build at 8 units an acre right now.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
there's
But
no
if their
change.
neighbor moves, they could build.
It's true, but in, like, here,
No,
like, you know.
I agree, but that's why you have to blow it up.
Yeah.
So that you
yeah.
can say, this is reasonable and this is why we think it's reasonable.
And also that this is existing.
Yeah.
In the cases where it's existing versus where
Yeah.
we're hoping to change.
Not to throw like a million different options around the center business. One other potential option would be to identify streets where you want first floor mixed use mandated and essentially create a donut. You've got in the middle or whatever, however the streets align, you say, this is not gonna be our 3A district, this is gonna be our mandatory mixed use district. Then in the rest, let's pretend that there's some area around that that's still zoned center business. Change that so that we have contiguity, you maintain your core of mixed use walkable development. And you still can gain some units in the center business without messing with mandatory mixed use.
How do you feel about that one?
Uh,
That appeal?
I think that's what
It's
we
interesting,
did.
is what I think. I think it's interesting. My view is that we, to the extent that we want to encourage units, we want to encourage units where it will be walkable, will be usable. And that is the downtown area. That's, as I've talked
Yeah.
to some people, that's where somebody will go out for dinner, or will go out for lunch, because they, even though it's January, they can make up those 200 yards to the restaurant.
All right, you
Yeah.
still?
Sorry.
Bill,
And that's, you've said that much more articulately, but that's what I was trying to convey was if we're trying to encourage density in that walkable downtown, I think that's good for business. It's good for those elements. So I'd like to see a scenario that promotes that in that area. So not that it's disproportionate, I appreciate that, but I think it's the question if it makes sense around the downtown area to drive the density, perhaps.
I guess that's what I was trying to say before. Also, I thought that you could have control over where it was, for so and have other areas, because I think that would be an interesting proposition. Thinking of the lot behind on Chapel Street, right, where next to the MBTA station, where it's very deep, but that could be an opportunity there versus not having it on Chapel Street, not having it on Great Plain Avenue, and making some restrictions. But I don't know how that works.
The sub-districts, we had a mutual client who at one point, they have a prominent corridor that is commercial. And what they wanted to do, this was pre-MBTA Act, it was just how they were thinking about it, is put the commercial on the main street, basically one parcel deep. Then the density, the next parcel would go up. And then there's abutting residential neighborhoods. So the density would then step down and the next parcel, so that by the time you got to the existing residential neighborhoods, you would just have, you would be pulling the density towards the street, but not so much that you were getting rid of the commercial. And then you were having to step down into the neighborhood, so it wasn't as much of an impact on the existing neighborhood. And that's a potential to look at. And then we just have to model exactly as you just suggested, those core streets and pull them out, keeps it walkable because everybody is within that walking distance of the street, but it kind of protects the things that people want to protect as well in terms of that and existing stable neighborhoods.
I like that. And then to push some of those levers. Pre-push height, density, both are like abutting the stations. I mean, they're purely walkable. That'd be a good opportunity. The offset.
in the housing plan, we had increased the height.
You had.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's where so many more of those units come from.
Some of them, yeah.
It's almost like it wants to be more prescriptive, like, that's why I'm saying, if you blow up an area, there might be a pockets of huge opportunity of density that's still sensitive to, because otherwise you're making a blanket statement of an entire area, people will say no, right? And then, you know, so how do we?
That more specific zoning, actually, you're starting to get, not quite to a form-based code, but that kind of idea of more of, I have a client who calls regular zoning paint by numbers. And then the other is, you know, you're getting into the little pointillism portion of it. We would have to model those as sub-districts, and then we'd have to figure out what the geography looks like to do it, but it is possible. So, to have those sub-districts.
Can I just ask the group how we would feel about agreeing that we'll present our existing zoning at this?
Yes, to call this existing zoning, it will confuse people and it will be seemed to be misleading. I think it's a good idea to have a simple chart that takes and there really are only two areas, apartment A1 and Hillside Avenue Business, that allow multifamily housing. And say, this is what we have, this is our existing zoning. It doesn't meet the 3A requirements. Then the next page is existing zoning districts with changes.
Mhm.
And then show the chart, sort of like this, but describe what the changes are.
But many of those changes are changes we made. What if we did existing zoning, which doesn't meet, because that is the existing
Right.
zoning, and then we have the housing plan changes? Because, I mean, why would we say existing zoning with changes when we have?
I guess what this chart does is it shows our existing business, our existing districts with their current boundaries.
Yeah.
And if we made the changes like in the business district, which is the one where the Bertucci's Plaza is there, to allow multifamily housing, but not change the boundaries at all. That would help us toward our goal. And if we allowed multifamily housing in our industrial districts, that will help us with our goal and show them where we are. If all that's all we do,
Yeah.
and then we could do more.
Okay, I'm just worried about presenting too many options, but we can consider that. Katie?
This might be a total curveball, but thinking about this holistically from a compliance perspective is what makes this really, really complicated. And because we know we have so much wiggle room under these scenarios for compliance, and what we're really talking about is, what do people want this town to look like? Why don't we stop the idea of what the scenarios are? And we can present the scenario of the housing plan, but maybe the rest of the presentation isn't a full scenario. It's
a vision.
Call out Needham Center, call out, the particular areas, because
that's what people are gonna relate to.
That's the questions that I think we are raising that we want feedback on. How do people feel about multifamily only in Needham Center? So
right,
it's too much and it's too confusing. So I guess I'm wondering, can we generate the ideas of what are the particular areas that we want feedback on? Or is it, how do you feel about changing the parking ratio? Or how do you feel about height? And just have that be the feedback instead of package 1, package 2. We can do that later to really fine tune, because compliance is not gonna be a problem.
but you have to tell the story, and I think that's what Jean's trying to say, maybe not with scenarios, but I think showing this is the existing, and this is where it's allowed, maybe not show all, just kind of do everything gray and just say, it's only allowed here and that's how much you have. Then do one that says, this is and then there's an issue with continuity, right? There's a hole here. So we have to change this and we have to change this and we have to change that, right? To create continuity. And then say, how do you feel about each particular area? Because people need to understand that what we have doesn't meet it. Which, otherwise you're gonna say, well, then we don't wanna change anything. Because this is saying, we don't wanna change anything the way we're showing it here. And then you go into each district and say, envision this,
Would it be helpful if we had examples of built projects for each of those districts? And we could say, do you want X in this district?
I think you have to.
Y in that district. So it's almost like a visual preference survey. for each
Imagine
of the
this,
districts.
imagine
Yeah.
this is acceptable for this
There's
district,
a
or for the
3-story work in
combination.
this district, there's a 4-story work in this
What I love
district.
about Katie's suggestion
Yeah.
is that I think if we show scenarios like this, we're gonna get a lot of, I don't want that. I don't like it, it's too big, whatever the issue is. If we look more holistically at what a neighborhood might look like, the vibe that we're trying to foster, then we'll get more of a more constructive criticism that we can actually use versus just no. And I think that's ultimately what we're after, right?
Yeah.
If we start to try and build these neighborhoods the way people want to live in them, that's really the spirit of the law. versus the strict compliance. So I think that's a great idea, Katie.
And we'll have 2 more community meetings to really fine
Yeah.
tune compliance when we need to.
We got a hand raised online. Josh?
Thanks, Heidi. I guess what I'm hearing is from all the discussion and I think Katie's suggestion is really good. The things that seem to be resonating in the conversation is the specific geographies that we're considering and then the extent around those areas. You know, when people look at maps, I think they're thinking mostly by geography, but I think we should welcome feedback certainly on other areas too, you know, such as height and you know, whether mixed use should be incentivized in certain areas. But if we can provide maps that contrast as much as possible in terms of geography and extent, I think that will elicit more feedback than providing maps that are similar to each other.
That's one of the reasons why I feel like doing the existing zoning that doesn't work, but shows where we stand, and then an aspirational map of the housing plan is a good contrast.
Just go from one to the other.
Well, yeah, because we're not yet at the point where we're gonna fix the boundaries, but we're showing what's possible.
But the housing plan feels finished and it's not, because it's all nuanced, right?
Right, and we have to say that, it's not finished. This is just a suggestion. This is, in fact, it's our first meeting, so this is our starting point, right?
Well, we can say this is what we did globally during the planning, because we don't want people to think this is a solution. It's not a solution yet, because we need input from the community. Right? So
Yeah.
maybe planning out the community meetings and what input we need for each community meeting.
Well,
So that-
yeah, and also I think it's important to point out that our next meeting is about how are we formatting and running this community meeting to make exactly those points clear, because this meeting is to find out or to decide what we're bringing to that meeting, but our next meeting is to talk about how to express, you know, the plot points that we're bringing. So we can definitely make sure to emphasize this as a starting point.
From my experience in community meetings, the first one should always be a listening meeting. And because then you're not coming up with solutions, you're coming up, you want to listen to them, but come up with vision, like saying, imagine this, what do you think? Otherwise, if you come up with solutions and you scare people away because they feel like you've already done all the work and they're just there as tokens.
So do we, well, this is sort of to talk about next meeting, but do we start with the smaller scenarios and look at what the housing looks like and then move on to the map and have a map be later in the meeting? Think about it. We can talk about it. We probably need to focus on what we're gonna bring right now. And I do see that Liz has a question online.
Well,
Liz?
it's not so much a question, it's just a comment. I'm thinking of myself if I went to such a community meeting and I was shown the charts and the maps with all the 20 different colors and 3 different circles. I think that's, you know, you have to show it, but I don't think people can really conceptualize anything by looking at that. And I think it might be best to go down a scenario neighborhood by neighborhood, let's say the downtown, where you show a photograph of what it is like now and an artist's rendering of what it would like with the proposed changes. And I think that would go a long way for people to imagine correctly what is being proposed. Otherwise, people can imagine anything they want, you know.
Liz, I think that's a great idea. Thank you. Yes, Katie, did you have something?
Because I'm wondering just to help facilitate for today and thinking about what we need before the next meeting. I'm wondering if can this group identify what are the questions that we want answered at that community meeting? Next meeting for us can still be what's that format, but are the questions something specific on the map? Are the questions parking ratios? Are the questions height?
I mean, if I lived in that district, I'd say, where do we want density? Like, what areas are beneficial for density? I think we need to come up with these questions to think, because Some areas, I mean, that way it takes it away from being scary for people and say, these areas already have density.
Lee, did you have something?
Well, these areas already, I mean, the existing zoning already provides for that density and that framework. People have
They don't
already,
know it.
Right, and I think that's why it's so important to show them what is current.
Can I just throw out, we've got some tools that we've been working on that I think could provide information that would help people give us that input. I think the idea of what questions you want to have asked and answered would be huge. And then we can go back for our next meeting and say, these are some of the tools that we've developed that we think are more visual for a public meeting that could help get to those questions. But if we know what the questions are, we know which tools we can pull, if you see what I mean.
I would think like the ultimate goal of this process is to get to zoning. That is going to go and get past a town meeting. So I think we need to figure out how we get that input that then drives the zoning.
Yeah.
So some of that is density, some of that's potentially parking. Imagine height is gonna be one of those things. Maybe transitions between different kinds of districts or neighborhoods. Where we want the density, I think is a great question, because then that drives like, well, where do we draw the overall district? Do we modify the zoning, what I'll call the zoning sub-districts? And then within each of those zoning sub-districts, how do we change the dimensional requirements, if at all?
Yes.
So it's like, I think we have to think about, I think those are the questions. I think it's zoning related questions.
Yes.
And then it's a matter of, yeah, you're right. What tools do we use to ask those questions and illustrate?
So maybe what
choices?
we take what we heard today and we come back to you with a proposal. I think your point that today was not from us about presenting any solutions. I think that's really important for the public to take away is we've got some numbers that let us know a direction that the town could move in, but we are by no means saying, okay, these are the numbers, you're done, let's go write that zoning. There's a whole lot of input that needs to happen at that public meeting, and that's an important message.
I also think that there needs to be a piece of education because it's very
Yes.
complex. Because people say, I don't want that density. Well, it already exists. They just don't know it.
Yes.
I'm talking about some of the commercial one.
well, I
Right.
think the density just really already exists. The profile for the buildings already exists. I
Right,
mean,
but
so
people don't
basically,
know that because they don't exist. The buildings don't necessarily exist in that way now.
that's, well, there
It
are.
doesn't maximize the density.
Right, you're right. There are examples of those buildings already built out in the district. For example, at the intersection of Great Plain Avenue and Dedham,
And
the
that could
apartment
be a good
building.
one to show and say, that's not scary. It's this. It's just, you need to make it digestible for people to understand what they already have in the district. And that it's not gonna be scary to them. I think people are just afraid of change, but if they know that it already exists,
Yes.
which they don't know.
Right. If you could say that this parcel right here has this building on it, and it has this capacity right now, what you're looking at is this density. Under current zoning.
Under current zoning.
It could be, so we've got X density, it could be Y density,
Right.
and then what would you like to see going forward? That might give people something to react to.
For
something to
example, those buildings
understand.
that are 1 story that in areas that could be 3 stories, people don't know that those could be taken down and become 3-story buildings. Right? So if you say this is already there,
Right.
and then these are the areas that we're saying could be added because there's already opportunity there that is contiguous with that, then it's kind of this conversation of, we're not trying to all of a sudden create a super dense Needham. We're just basically using the tools that we already have to make it even better with your vision. Or I don't know how to explain. I'm just thinking of commercial one where people are like, you know, these are the things that could happen right now. They didn't even know that those things were even available. And then they start, you know, there's miscommunication. So I just want to make sure that it's like an educational and a conversation before getting too deep into the weeds for the people that already know the zoning.
And may I go back to what Heidi said? I think what she was saying is that we present something that says, this is our existing zoning. I mean, truly our existing zoning, any
Right.
changes whatsoever. And it might be a good idea. At first I thought, well, it shouldn't include general residence. That's not really multifamily. But we might in the end need that general residence for contiguity. And it does provide 8 units per acre, and it's not scary because it's already there, that's what we already have. So we show, apartment A1, Hillside Avenue business, general residence, and say, this is what we have.
Yeah.
And then, rather than going to this so-called existing zoning scenario, which doesn't meet our dwelling units per acre, and even if you make general resident, I think you said, even if you make general residence 8 units per acre, it still doesn't meet it. There's no sense presenting that.
Well, I thought if you
And that's what I
reduce
thought
the
had-
general residence, it brought it into conformity, no.
Yeah, no, so we should really go right to the housing plan scenario. There's no sense presenting the 3, it's just the 2. And then,
Yeah,
no,
sorry.
no.
To your point, it's showing the existing says, this is what we have, we're not far off.
And we're not
all
far off.
comfortable with this, you know what this looks like. And then we can add in.
I just think there has to be a strategy for the 3 meetings and what we're trying to get out of them.
Yeah, I'm just worried that this is fair. I think so.
Could I make a suggestion? So, at the beginning of the public hearing, being able to inform everyone what the parameters are. So what are the levers that we have to change? So we can look at geography that can change. We can look at height. We can look at parking requirements. These are all the things that are within our power to change and that the public can give feedback on. I think that is really important for people to understand.
I guess one thing I'm worrying about right now is how are we getting this feedback? Like, I agree with you, Natasha, that it's very important to listen. But we can't possibly hear from everyone, and people are gonna have like emotions about all this stuff, because it's their homes and it's their routines. I'm worried about how we allow people out.
I think we go to smaller groups. I think we go to smaller groups like we did at the beginning of because you will have people that are angry. That's why I'm saying, I think it's not saying, okay, here's a plan that we're thinking about. It's more of, we need a cartoon set for the 3 meetings. So like what is the goal? Tell them this is the goal of each meeting and how, but the first one has to be listening. We can't just go in and like share all this information or you're just gonna
But
be
that's
hitting a
all mapped out
wall.
in the scope of work.
I mean, I do planning board, I'm an architect, I do this all week long.
Yeah.
It's bad form not to go in with a listening session.
No, I'm not suggesting that we don't go and listen. In fact, I'm saying, how actually do we listen? All
I
right.
just say the whole first community meeting is to listen, but we
have to
have to
have
present what this is, what this is, and to start getting some feedback. I guess the distinction being made is if we show no maps, no questions, nothing for feedback, then people
But you don't
aren't
show
gonna know what
solutions.
to show us.
What if,
Hang on a second.
I guess I'm confused why we're feeling like this first community workshop is not listening, because the whole thing is
Yeah, it
listening.
is
Yeah.
100%
The
going
whole
to be
thing
a
is
listening.
listening.
Yeah.
No, I know, but if we start showing solutions, it won't.
No,
We're not
suggesting.
showing solutions
May I
at all.
suggest?
Think first reaction.
Yeah. The parking study did a great first meeting in which they set up easels, which he focused on areas with maps, so you could understand it, see a big scale. And then there were easels have to, with post-it notes, write your comments, tell us what you want. So we don't have people talking. And that, I think, gets emotions going, but everyone can vent on post-it notes,
Yeah.
post them, we have a record, and we can act on it.
There was no central presentation.
No central
No
presentation.
central, it's just.
Well, no, I think
Well,
you need a presentation. I think
Yeah.
you need both, but I think you need both.
you go first.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sure, you go first.
So well, I was thinking along the same lines. I whispered to Emily while you all were talking. Maybe we can set up, the presentation could be very brief, but I do think we need some guardrails for the discussion, right? We have to do this. These are the numbers we have to hit. I think it's important for people to know that. Whether they like it or they don't, it's sort of irrelevant at this point. Needham's
That's
decided to
information.
do it.
Yeah.
Yep, so we'll have that. Then we could set up stations where we've got a mapping station that says, you know, maybe it is, you know, here's the housing plan. You know, would you make adjustments to that or not? Or here's existing zoning, would you make adjustments to that or not? We could run some tools that we have in-house that can show sort of generally what densities would be under existing conditions or whatever to model that. We can show photographs that show like existing densities, existing buildings. We could have stations on the specific levers, and we could say, here's a station on height, here's a station on parking, here's a station on neighborhood transitions, here's a station on mixed use. And we can have examples so that we can get that feedback on the levers, because that will drive the zoning and drive the future scenarios. I think that's what we need, is that input.
I just want to say that that's responding to what Josh Levy said, that there are certain factors
Yes.
that can change, like even, oh, look at apartment 91, it's only 11.3. Well, you said, yeah, but there's the parking requirement, there's the
Right.
setback requirements. There are all these factors that can be changed.
Right.
And I think Josh was saying the same thing. Yeah.
I do like the idea of looking at the levers, because then they're not looking at the map, but can we, if we set it up that way, can we have pictures of different parking scenarios, for
Absolutely.
example?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then different heights
Yep.
and different, whatever the other.
We can actually take these
Right.
diagrams.
'Cause I
and
think
instead
pictures
of
are gonna
being
be
it by
important for folks.
district, we're gonna have a board that says, this is the lot size, this is what a 10,000 square foot lot size looks like. We're gonna do height, here's what a 3-story building, here's what a 4-story, here's what a 5-story. Images of recent projects, whether here or elsewhere, that allow people to visualize what each of these means, and then a discussion of how they work together.
I personally would still like to have a really giant copy of this map, of these maps, or well, the maps that we talked about, the real existing zoning from the housing plan, displayed in the room, because I think, people are gonna wanna know, and it's almost like admitting the obvious if you don't have that. If the presentation kind of talks more about the numbers and the levers and explains those, and then people just walk around and.
Well,
Yeah.
I guess I have a question. What if, I mean, to me, I guess what I'd like to know is we have a housing plan here that is recommending a certain configuration, which for certain districts, which implies a certain urban built form. And we have certain boundaries around that land that define what those districts are. So the questions I'm thinking you want answered are these boundaries appropriate? And visualizations about, is this really what you want to see happen there? Because this is what the zoning will lead to in terms of images.
They don't know that. I mean, that's too much information for the first meeting. I think, maybe you blow up those areas, like, so that each person feels like these districts were interested in doing it, but not these. I think looking at it holistically is overwhelming at this first meeting for me. But I don't disagree. You should have it up and say, this was a scenario, kind of conceptual scenario that happened, and it's one way of looking at it, but your feedback is gonna help us tailor it, right?
Yeah.
Nice.
I guess I really don't understand what the feedback is and what the instruments are to get to the questions.
I think, for example, Bill's discussion of where we really want the density and what kind of neighborhood we want these new districts to be is sort of what we're thinking of. Like, how do people want their town to be structured? Where do they want most of this housing? Like, if they were to take an apartment or a condo, where would they want that to be? So that it would be convenient for them, and how do they feel about how much parking would be really necessary? Because the idea here is to build this along the T line, right?
Right.
But what if people aren't feeling like they're gonna take the T? Or if they feel like they don't need any car at all because they're on the T. I mean, I just feel like, the idea here is to make this work for Needham. And while this is a large group, it's certainly not representative, and so we have to let people have their points made, and I always learn a lot from that, actually.
Yeah, we just have to set expectations, because if people come to the meeting and they look at the, let's say the housing plan map, for example, which does suggest expansion, or well, it does suggest rezoning, which then allows us to expand the MBTA district from what we're modeling under existing conditions. If they said, well, we don't like that, we really want this district only to be 75 acres, they need to understand that at 75 acres, we need a lot of density, which is gonna mean 6-story buildings on all these parcels. So I think we do need to have some, again, like some parameters around, like, if you tell us this, here are the sort of ramifications.
Well, right, but I also think that this group isn't gonna let that happen necessarily. I mean, we want these comments to guide, but we're not turning this into a metropolis of 6 stories. So I mean,
But that's what
there's
they
a
think we're
break.
doing. That's what most people, have you seen the Facebook whenever you say something and you think that, no, seriously. And I don't even follow it, but I've heard that I've been cool. No, I'm just saying,
Yeah, but when they see 370
They get
acres, they
nervous.
might say like, it's a huge district, we only need 50. Well, I need them to understand that at 50, that means something very different.
Right,
We
but I
may
think
need
also when
paired
we show the
levels,
map,
yeah.
we're
Right.
saying like this, this is a reasonably tiny slice of Needham right here.
It
and-
is.
And especially when you consider that most of this is zoned.
Will be how many
As-
acres and-
I'm just
if you live
anticipating
there, you
exactly
get
what
really
we're gonna
nervous.
Well, but that's part
Yeah.
of, I think that's partly why we need your presentation to
Yes.
say, this is a trade-off.
Definitely.
Yeah, you go down
Yep.
in density, or land mass, you're gonna have to
Absolutely.
go up in density. And so we need to balance these things, and we're looking for your thoughts
Yep.
on doing that.
Now, I mean, one way I've always thought about this is what we're showing people is suburban multifamily density.
Mhm.
And we have many examples in our town. And we're saying we need to zone some other areas so that it's possible to develop housing like this. We need, but it is true, I think, such housing in our business zone or industrial zone might look different. The lots are smaller. It won't look like a great, like a multifamily development with trees and grass all around, and it will look different. And so I think comparing the two types of housing, because I don't know what it would look like, because we don't have it today in our town, except the mixed use housing on Dedham Avenue is like the only example we
one.
have. Yeah.
So I just want to point out that it's the clock. And I actually think that we've made quite a lot of progress. So to be respectful of everyone's time, and I'm not suggesting that we shut down this discussion, but I just want to see if we can maybe summarize where we are right now. It seems to me that the consensus is that we're going to bring 2 maps to our meeting. We're going to bring the true existing zoning scenario and all the numbers that are attendant on that, and the housing plan suggestions and the numbers that go with that. We already talked about this meeting is to achieve that. And if we've decided on that, then that seems to me like we can all call this a win. Next meeting, and maybe a portion of this meeting, we can talk about the format of the public meeting and how we're gonna incorporate those maps and how we want that to run. I mean, I actually think having stations and talking about the levers is part of this conversation about what we want to bring to the meeting. But I just want to see if my understanding of the consensus, at least on the 2 maps, is correct.
And can I add a comment? I agree with virtually everything you said, with the exception of, my own thought is that we ought to show something that has the downtown area.
Okay, I think that's reasonable. To have a little, can we have a little like cutout of that just talks about the downtown area?
Could we get like a large print of the housing plan zoning, print out like large print, like 4 foot, 4 by 12, with a giant table
Yeah, no, I think that
we have the-
That was my question,
Are
actually.
you talking about this?
Do we have a location, yes?
What?
We have a location? for the
Howard
meeting?
Flat.
Yeah, Howard,
Yeah,
That's
very
right.
good.
So
That's what I wanted to know, is how big it was.
I guess, Ron, just to tease out what you said, so when you talk about the downtown, are you talking about really having Needham Center and Chestnut Street? And to ask the question about mixed use or singular use in both districts, and at what types of intensity?
Broadly speaking, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so it's actually Chestnut and Needham Centers.
And we can do a large format.
Yeah, that'd be.
I guess the question is it only in person or is it in person and virtual? Because then we have different tools.
Please, I'll be in person.
Yeah.
It's just in person.
How are we gonna?
We're
do
okay
it?
with that. I just want to make sure that we know.
Yes,
what
in
you-
person. please.
Yes.
Because doing a hybrid meeting with stations is gonna, I don't know how you're gonna do that.
That's going to be
So-
incredibly difficult.
Just a thought, because the public expectation is for hybrid. I agree, this is incredibly challenging to do hybrid. We could think about the presentation part being hybrid and recorded. And I can give some more thought to, can we get online feedback on the stations somehow? Maybe not in real time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so
Well-
could we
Leave a comment on this.
have, you know, a survey or have a way for people to electronically, but they wouldn't be happening in real time, I guess is
That's fine.
my thing.
Because if we're talking about stations, it's not gonna be happening in real time for all of us.
Yeah, so,
We'll collect all of it after and then we can.
and I guess I would say, I'm not committing to it, but I'm committing to us bringing you some ideas for next meeting about how that might be possible.
I have a question. Could those stations be at town hall during the week and people could put their post-its on it? I did that at UMass Boston not so long ago. And we just had the boards and people just put, you know, as people walk by, we stopped them and made them put things on the board and then you have the information. And then you have the information for the meeting.
Yeah.
Well, it would have to be after. I'm just worried because then part of the value of the stations is in conjunction with their presentation.
Or it could happen after the meeting if that's.
Because
Yeah.
they have to understand that there are boundaries that we have to, you know, there's stuff that we have to comply with, so it's not just, you know, free for all with the lever.
But you can still get feedback.
Yeah.
You can get feedback and then you can get feedback after the meeting, or like put them back up again after the meeting once they have more information.
Boards
I
at
don't know.
town hall do serve multifunction, right? I mean, part of it is collecting comments, which is great, but part of it is about the education and letting people know, hey, there's something going on, because they can see it every time they go past town hall. So we get fewer comments, but you will get more awareness if you do that.
I think also it would be helpful for the next meeting is for you to put a deck together of what you think would be the best way to present this information, and then we can react to it and add more information. Because I think seeing it visually will let us know if it's easy to understand or not, versus us just throwing out different types of drawings you should put in it. I don't know. Because you might show something that you think is great, and we're like, wait a second, that's not right, or.
Right.
So just so I understand your ask, are you asking for the meeting on the 18th for us to basically come with a full out fleshed
Just
meeting? with photos?
just a draft, a cartoon set of it, not necessarily done.
Okay, so what stations we're gonna have, how we're gonna engage the public and get their feedback, and maybe a rough outline of what the
Conceptually,
what the
yeah, you
presentation
don't
will
have
look
to
like.
have. It's just, otherwise, it'll be hard for us to.
And yeah,
That's great, that matches my expectation.
Yeah.
Of what we would bring to the next meeting.
I'm just curious if, I don't know if we can go to the slides where it shows the levers under the housing plan scenario, but I guess I want to be clear so that we know what we're bringing to that next meeting. Do people want feedback on every lever from the community? Do we want rear setback, side setback?
No.
No. And this group now come to
Yeah.
consensus on which levers we're bringing back
it's
to you.
these.
Well, I want
These are
them
the
to
crit-
tell
yeah, I
us
know,
that.
but what I'm saying is
I
these are the
want
critical
consensus.
ones, so.
Which,
I think it-
which arrow that went with what? I mean, you said that night.
So the dark blue arrow goes with the existing zoning for each district, and the brighter is if the HPP changed it.
Okay,
So,
Josh, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I think with the levers, I think it's important to list all of them just so that people know what is within, what all the parameters are that can be changed, not necessarily talking about. I think it's to prime people for discussion. So if you tell people up front what all the levers are, then when you show them the map, they can say, oh, I like, this area, but I don't like how tall, a building. What I'm saying is they can use the levers in framing their questions or their comments.
And Katie, what I meant was, those are the universe that should be chosen because setbacks don't affect the model, so I don't want a conversation on setbacks, that's all. So out of these 6, which are the important ones?
So how are the setbacks used then? I don't know.
The setbacks are not used by the model. We collect them so we understand whether or not the setbacks are out with a likely effective development profile. In other words, if you had a lot, if your standard lot size was, say, 5,000 square feet, so 50 by 100, and your front setback was something like 45 feet, we'd know that that's not a setback that's going to work in your district. But it's not used by the model. The model flags it.
Doesn't it make some of your land unusable?
The open space is what is used as a proxy for setbacks. Complex, but.
Okay, but
that's why I'm saying, don't spend a lot of time going through the setbacks, yeah. At least for this first meeting.
Katie's right, having a list of.
Yeah, these 6 are the ones that you would want to choose from for your focus.
But these are the things that are gonna be affected. I mean, you can't expect someone to come in and tell you how many dwellings per unit per acre.
No, that's what we would show, exactly, that would be part of what the education
I think the
profile.
levers are the height, the parking, right?
Great, perfect.
And the density, and I mean, I like the fact that you were gonna show, like, sometimes you can have more density and less density and things like that, but it should be an open space, right? How much open space?
All right, would it be possible for the levers to do simple animations in the presentation so that if you want to do this, this will happen. If you do this, so it might be sort of a causation.
Yeah.
Just a simple
we could think
animation.
so. Yeah.
And then just like, here's an image of it.
Sorry.
I have a question about how this all is going to work with the stations. Is it expected that each one of us will staff a station? Who's going to staff the stations?
Emily and I haven't talked about this, but I'll just say in Eric's ideal world, our staff and ourselves will be at each station. And we would invite one of you to
This side
join
of this
us.
table will be at the stations.
No, we
And-
have staff. We have teams.
Yeah, it's not just us.
This is that we were there for 3 hours, 2 days, at the time when everyone was walking in and out, so you can grab a spectrum of people. So maybe if there's a farmer's market or whatever, and there's a lot of people that are coming in, you stand there for a certain amount of time, and then you get a good part of the population. And the other thing we did is that each Post-it, like we had a Post-it for, in this case, it was a college, so it was students, one for staff, one for private. We could have this for families, for, or whatever, however you wanna designate the Post-its, so that you knew what kind of demographic was responding to it. But it was super, people felt so empowered by this. We had about 8 boards and, it
I
was.
went to the parking one, and it was like that, it was very good, yep.
Yeah, it engages people because it becomes not just us talking at them or
We
having.
don't do that.
Right, no, I know you don't, but I'm just saying, it's just, at least for the first one, is that it becomes more interactive.
So are there sets of questions then that people respond to? So, and then report back to the group so that you walk away with
The
set?
Post-it, so there's a question at the top, what do you feel about parking? These are 3 different parking scenarios, and people will just put a Post-it. So it's not confrontational, it's just informational.
Then the second one, you can have this, if you want, you can have the small group discussions on things. But I agree, the Post-its for the first meeting work out really well. You don't get people taking positions before they've had a chance to absorb all of the information. They're kind of doing it on an individual basis. And then the second one, you can have the discussions where people are like, okay, I've been informed, I've been to the first meeting. Now I want to talk about what exactly these implications are. So I think that's an option to keep for the next meeting.
Well, now I feel a lot calmer. I was thinking to myself, our next meeting, we're gonna have to reverse. I don't think we're ready.
Much information, I mean, it's too much information for us and I mean, you know what better than I do because you were in the zoning group, but
Yeah.
it's a lot and you don't want people to be turned off by that.
And I mean, some things we're learning tonight, you know, that we didn't realize about the guidelines, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not an easy topic. So to wrap people's head, and especially not easy for members of the public who are providing input on something they don't think. Try and make it as easy as possible for them to understand and give that important input back into the process.
And to be excited about density, like how do you turn it around so that density isn't a bad thing, that it's excitement, so that then you can make good choices rather than just the basics just to get it through.
I like your focus on what is important for Needham, what does Needham want, what does the community want in the different areas. I think that will lead to a robust discussion.
Yeah.
Right. Just wanna-
Can I just recap what I think I heard
Yeah,
just before we
please.
break? Just because I really like having expectations for everybody. It just helps me figure out what we're doing. Okay, for the next meeting, we are going to come with essentially a storyboard for the November public meeting with details about what we think we want to do, the stations we want to have, the questions we want to ask, and then what sort of methods we're going to use to elicit feedback from people who come to the station. I'll storyboard out the PowerPoint as well, so I'll give you an idea of what that could look like. I'll try to figure out for that meeting how to maybe show an animation or two about that. And then we'll also just think about how many stations we want to have, kind of what materials we might need in that room, like tables, whatever, and then we'll think about like staffing. How many folks we'll bring, and then who will be with us from this collective group at each of those stations.
And I would just add to that list, hybrid option. For
Yeah.
non-in-person feedback.
Yep. There's a couple of different methods we've used for that, so we can talk and see, given what we're suggesting, what would be most effective, and then we can talk through and see if that's doable. So,
Thanks.
okay.
All right. Anybody have anything else? Very
Emotions.
Good progress tonight. I think this is fantastic. I think we did a lot of good work here. So.
Motion to close the meeting.
Motion to adjourn?
To adjourn.
Second.
Excellent.
Quick question, October 18th, we are meeting remotely. Because that's the way we could pin down the consultants, they're like traveling and all this stuff, so. In order to meet before November 9th, that meeting is entirely remote. I wanted to know, do you all want to meet at 6 or 7?
There's a finance committee meeting at 7 PM that evening, so I likely will not be able to join.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, this was the only meeting, even remotely, that we could pin them down at all. So it's basically like whoever can make it that night, great.
This prep meeting, we're talking about, is it gonna be all remote? Oh,
Well, I love an early meeting personally, so,
I don't care. Together.
I could do the 6 o'clock also. Okay, good.
fantastic.
And that was okay for you guys?
This is the
It's the 18th.
Yes.
Something I'd like to see the revised numbers for the charts you had in your packet with the revision for the general residents.
If you want to write, I can tell you what it is if you want to write it down.
I have it down, and why don't we exchange those numbers afterwards?
Sure.
Like the in page 11, you mean, write it down, the scenarios for modeling. It's.
So Jean, excuse me, but so can they send them to us just to make sure that they
That's
have
what
the
I
right
asked
number?
them.
Yeah.
So they'll email it, right?
We'll make that,
Yeah,
Perfect.
because we all want to have them,
All right, so there is a motion on the table to adjourn, and do we need to have we don't need to roll call or anything.
We should, because we're hybrid.
We should, because we're hybrid. Okay, we'll start with the Zoom folks first. Josh?
Yes.
Liz?
What was the question?
Should we
To adjourn the
adjourn?
meeting.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. What is it during the meeting?
To adjourn the meeting, would you like? to
Oh,
go
yeah,
home?
definitely. I think we've said it all.
All right, I think Michael's no longer with us. What's that?
We lost Bill.
And we lost Bill, so then we come
take a
to
roll.
Jean.
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
I vote yes.
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 All right, then we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.